perfect home, a tragedy unfolded that would change a family's life forever. Could it be that what seemed like a simple accident was, in fact, something much darker? As the investigation progressed, a chilling story began to emerge. The man who had once seemed so devoted to his family might be harboring a much darker secret. With each piece of evidence that emerged, the story grew more twisted and terrifying. One question remained. Was this truly a tragic accident, or something much more calculated? Susan Sills was a woman of remarkable accomplishments, a successful businesswoman with a sharp mind and a devoted mother. Born and raised in a small town in California, she always demonstrated a natural intelligence and an undeniable drive for success. From a young age, Susan excelled academically, earning top honors throughout her school years, and she eventually pursued an MBA from a prestigious business school. Her dedication to her career led her to rise quickly in the competitive world of business management, where she was respected for her leadership and vision. Her life took a dramatic turn when she met Dr. Scott Sills, a highly regarded reproductive specialist, while seeking treatment for infertility issues during her marriage to her first husband. Their professional relationship soon blossomed into something more personal. The deep connection they shared was undeniable, and it wasn't long before Susan left her first husband and married Scott. The two embarked on a new venture together, opening a private reproductive clinic. Susan took on the crucial role of managing the clinic's operations, marketing, and financial matters, while Scott focused on the medical side of things. Their clinic became a highly successful endeavor, drawing attention for its reputation in helping countless couples achieve their dream of parenthood. Despite her demanding career, Susan remained a devoted mother to their twins, who were born through IVF. She seemed to have it all: a flourishing career, a growing family, and a strong reputation in the business world. To those around her, Susan appeared to be the epitome of success and happiness. Friends and colleagues admired her wit, charm, and the kindness she exuded, making her a beloved figure in both her professional and personal circles. But beneath the surface, there were cracks in Susan's seemingly perfect life. Her marriage to Scott, once the foundation of their shared dreams, began to unravel. Over time, Susan's frustration and dissatisfaction with her relationship became evident to those close to her. Friends reported that she often described her marriage as controlling and emotionally draining. She was unhappy with the imbalance of power in their relationship, and how Scott seemed to dominate not just their home life, but their business too. Adding to the tension was a social media photo Susan posted, which reportedly sparked intense jealousy and conflict with Scott. While Susan's frustration with her marriage was no secret to those around her, she was also determined to maintain her independence and continue building her career. She had built a life for herself that she was proud of, but there were underlying tensions that many were unaware of. The financial and emotional pressures began to take a toll on her health and well-being. Susan's frustration with her personal life mixed with the professional pressures she faced in managing a successful clinic. Around 9 in the morning, an agitated Dr. Scott Sills, a renowned reproductive specialist, placed a call to 911. He told the dispatcher that his wife, Susan Sills, had fallen down the stairs and was lying unconscious, showing no signs of life. Scott had a reputation in their Californian community as a respected doctor who had brought hope to countless couples struggling with infertility, which made his call all the more shocking. He turned on the speakerphone, allowing the dispatcher to guide him through the resuscitation steps until emergency personnel arrived. When the paramedics arrived, they found Susan lifeless. Her body was positioned oddly, covered by her clothing and surrounded by an unusual assortment of objects: a stainless steel pot standing upright, a wallet, an empty medication container, and a scarf loosely draped near her neck. The positioning of the items struck the medics as peculiar, almost staged. It was unusual for a woman to fall in such a way that these items would lie around her in such a deliberate fashion. Most alarming of all, Susan had distinct markings on her neck that the responders immediately noted. The marks bore the unmistakable furrows of strangulation, a pattern inconsistent with a simple fall. Rather than showing the usual injuries one might expect from a fall, these marks hinted at asphyxiation, causing concern among both the paramedics and the police officers who soon arrived on the scene. Scott told police that his wife had been preparing to walk their dogs, a task she did every morning. He suggested that she might have slipped, and the dogs, finding her unresponsive on the ground, could have inadvertently tugged on her scarf while attempting to rouse her, thus strangling her. However, the police officer on duty found this explanation dubious. The idea of their dogs accidentally strangling Susan with her scarf seemed implausible, especially given the furrow marks. The officer's instinct was that this might be more than an unfortunate accident. This suspicion was heightened by Scott's oddly calm and collected demeanor. Though his wife had just died, he appeared composed and cooperative, agreeing to DNA tests and allowing officers full access to search the house. While he demonstrated an outward willingness to assist, the officer noted the controlled neutrality with which he responded to questions and the absence of any signs of distress, which many might expect in such a tragic situation. Meanwhile, investigators began piecing together the sequence of events leading up to the morning of Susan's death. They questioned the couple's 12-year-old twins, Eric and Mary Catherine, who offered insight into their mother's condition the previous evening. According to the children, their mother had been suffering from an intense migraine, which had caused her to retire early to Mary Catherine's room. Susan's migraines were well known within the family. During these episodes, she often prepared herself with certain objects to help her endure the pain: her medication, a pot in case of nausea, and a familiar scarf, which she used as a comfort item. That night was no different, and Susan had taken the pot and scarf with her when she lay down. The twins both described their family as warm and loving, emphasizing that their parents rarely argued. According to them, their parents had always maintained a close bond, a partnership characterized by understanding and mutual support. They noted, however, that their mother's migraines had recently worsened, possibly due to the stress of balancing work and family life. With Scott's high-profile job and Susan's active role in managing their home and the clinic, the pressures of their lifestyle had been building. As investigators took stock of this information, they attempted to map out the likely events of that night. According to the twins, Susan had decided to sleep in Mary Catherine's room, the darkest and quietest in the house, to alleviate her migraine. Scott reportedly checked on her around midnight, finding her fast asleep. However, the police noted that Scott's account of the events raised more questions than it answered. If Susan had fallen accidentally, it was curious that the bruises on her body were not consistent with a single fall, but rather with multiple impacts, for a single tumble down the stairs. As they continued to search the scene, detectives focused on the peculiar objects surrounding Susan's body. The stainless steel pot standing upright seemed out of place, as did the wallet and medication container nearby. These items would not naturally fall with someone down the stairs, and the position of the scarf, with its delicate placement near her neck, led investigators to wonder whether someone might have staged the scene. In Scott's version, Susan's scarf was pulled by the dogs after her fall, yet investigators were skeptical. Could the scarf's position and the odd assortment of objects truly be attributed to a tragic accident? As investigators delved deeper, they began to piece together a different narrative, one that considered the potential for foul play. The sequence of injuries, the positioning of the items, and Scott's seemingly composed response raised significant red flags. They considered the possibility that Susan's death might have involved a struggle, with the scarf potentially used in an act of strangulation. Scott's explanation left many questions unanswered, and his lack of visible grief only intensified their suspicions. Yet the detectives needed more concrete evidence to build a case against Scott. They continued to question neighbors, family members, and friends, probing deeper into Scott and Susan's relationship. As additional pieces of evidence surfaced, from phone records to financial documents, the investigation took a darker turn. The image of the ideal, loving family began to crack, revealing underlying tensions that hinted at motives and circumstances that cast doubt on the accident theory. Around 4 a.m, young Eric was roused from sleep by the raised voices of his parents from the room next door. Although he couldn't make out specific words, he sensed that something wasn't quite right. He strained his ears to listen, but didn't hear any noises that indicated physical violence or even a loud argument, just an intensity that seemed out of place at such an early hour. A few minutes later, his father, Dr. Scott Sills, walked into the master bedroom where his twin sister, Mary Catherine, had been sleeping. When she asked what had happened, Scott reassured her, saying he'd had a minor disagreement with her mother over an email Susan had received for work. He downplayed the situation, telling her not to worry, and promised it was just a small work-related matter. Reassured by her father's calm tone, Mary Catherine fell back asleep. To the officers, Scott's calmness during the initial questioning also seemed unusual. While he agreed to cooperate fully, his measured, almost indifferent tone unsettled them. The strange circumstances around Susan's death led them to open a more thorough investigation to clarify what had really happened that night. As they pressed Scott for more details, he revealed that he had briefly checked on Susan around 4 a.m. and found her sitting up in bed, typing on her laptop. He expressed concern, urging her to rest rather than work given her severe migraine. He claimed that she brushed him off, insisting that she had work to complete, which led to a mild disagreement between them. Scott explained that after their conversation, he went to bed, assuming that Susan would come around and get some sleep. Later, around 6:30 a.m., he woke up and suggested to Mary Catherine that they go swimming together in their pool. However, before they could head outside, Mary Catherine stumbled upon a scene that would haunt her forever. Her mother's body lay at the foot of the staircase, motionless. Susan's long scarf was still around her neck, and a pot lay on the floor nearby. Horrified, the young girl screamed for her father. The explanations appeared far-fetched, and each detail investigators uncovered raised new, unsettling doubts. One detail particularly troubled them. If Susan had indeed fallen down the stairs while carrying a metal pot, why hadn't anyone heard the noise? A fall involving a metal object hitting the hard, tiled steps should have created a loud clatter, likely loud enough to wake at least one family member. The mounting list of odd details continued to add tension to the investigation, and suspicion began to point more heavily toward Scott. Further doubt was cast when police observed visible injuries on Scott's forehead and a large bruise on his arm. Scott claimed he had sustained these injuries while working on a car repair in the garage with Eric's assistance the day before the tragedy. However, when detectives spoke to Eric, he contradicted his father's account, saying he hadn't seen any injuries on Scott during or after their time working on the car. The inconsistency was subtle but significant, further intensifying the investigators' focus on Scott. The strangeness of the scene continued to deepen. Eric mentioned that the night before the incident, he had seen his mother locking the family's dogs in their cage for the night, a routine that usually signaled bedtime for the animals. It made little sense to him that Susan, especially given her weakened state from the migraine, would get up so early to walk them. This odd detail added yet another layer of doubt about the story Scott presented. During their investigation, police also inspected Mary Catherine's bedroom, where Susan had spent the night due to her migraine. It was there that forensic investigators discovered what they hadn't expected. Small but visible bloodstains on the curtains, walls, and bedside table. Mary Catherine insisted that the room had been spotless when her mother first entered it, and she had noticed no bloodstains at all. When detectives questioned Scott about the stains, he offered a vague explanation, claiming they were old marks from the previous spring when he had accidentally cut himself while fixing a window screen. However, forensic analysts noted that the stains appeared fresh, casting further suspicion on Scott's account. Despite these ominous discoveries, the evidence still fell short of justifying formal charges. Susan's body was sent to the medical examiner's laboratory in hopes that an autopsy might clarify the circumstances of her death. 4 days later, the autopsy report arrived, but rather than providing clear answers, it left investigators with even more questions. The examiner's report noted numerous injuries on Susan's body, including a significant spinal fracture at the base of her neck. According to the forensic expert, this injury could explain the neck marks that initially appeared to be signs of strangulation. Additionally, ruptured blood vessels were found in Susan's eyes, often a sign of asphyxiation. Still, the examiner could not definitively say whether these injuries stemmed from an accident or were the result of a violent altercation. The ambiguous findings left the investigation stalled, unable to pinpoint the exact cause of death. While every detail seemed to suggest foul play, no single piece of evidence conclusively proved Scott's involvement. Detectives faced a challenging task. They needed to piece together a coherent narrative from a series of fragmented and suspicious clues. Forensic experts focused intently on the evidence collected from the Sills residence, looking for clues that could provide definitive answers. One of their first priorities was examining the bloodstains found in Mary Catherine's room. The samples, along with other physical evidence, were submitted for detailed forensic analysis. Additionally, Susan's phone and laptop were confiscated to investigate her recent communications and activities, hoping they might reveal any underlying issues or sources of tension in her personal life. To gain further insight into Susan's life and relationships, the investigators turned to the Sills' neighbors. However, these inquiries yielded few results, as the couple was known to work long hours with limited social interactions in the neighborhood. None of the neighbors reported hearing any unusual sounds on the night or evening before Susan's death, which only deepened the mystery. The investigation then expanded to include Susan's professional network. By interviewing her colleagues and friends in the medical field, detectives hoped to identify anyone who might know of underlying tensions or conflicts within her marriage. This strategy proved fruitful when they found a witness who hinted at the couple's private struggles, suggesting that their marriage might not have been as harmonious as it appeared. Meanwhile, Scott's students painted a different picture. Known for his charm and stylish appearance, Scott often attended class in elegant three-piece suits, radiating confidence and cheerfulness. Some students who had met him outside of class even described him as generous and supportive. One student shared how Scott had discreetly helped her financially on several occasions when she couldn't afford essentials like lunch or transportation home. To his students, Scott Sills appeared to be a kind-hearted, charismatic professor with a promising future. Scott's reputation for success had been evident from a young age. A top-performing student, he initially pursued law school but eventually turned to medicine, where he excelled in reproductive health. His determination, intelligence, and drive brought him professional respect and success. It was in his medical career that he met Susan, a few years before the tragedy that would alter his life. In the early days after Susan's death, her family and friends believed the incident to be nothing more than a tragic accident. However, as detectives conducted interviews, suspicions grew, fueled by Scott's reaction to the ordeal. His refusal to discuss the incident at all, coupled with his seemingly detached demeanor, began to unsettle those around him. Soon, the police began to suspect that they were dealing with something far darker than an accident. In the days following Susan's death, forensic experts revisited the Sills' home multiple times, and Scott's behavior continued to raise red flags. He showed little sign of mourning, remaining unusually composed and businesslike. His statements about Susan were noticeably devoid of personal sentiment. He spoke of her only as a capable professional and business partner. He never once described her as a beloved wife or devoted mother. This impersonal attitude struck investigators as peculiar, adding to their suspicions that he might view her as a mere collaborator rather than a loved one lost. One of the most alarming reports came from Scott's colleagues at the clinic. On the day after Susan's death, Scott arrived at work as if it were just another day. He showed no visible signs of distress and didn't take even a short leave to cope with the emotional impact. His colleagues found his behavior shocking, as they had expected him to grieve or at least take time to process the loss. When they shared their concerns with the police, a clinic nurse who frequently assisted Scott provided even more unsettling information. She observed that Scott actively avoided any conversations about Susan's death. His physical transformation was only one part of his apparent new lifestyle. He also became noticeably active on social media, sharing posts about his gym sessions, dinners at upscale restaurants, and stylish attire. There was no mention of his late wife, nor any signs of grief or sorrow on his social media. In fact, Scott's posts suggested that he was enthusiastically embracing a new chapter of his life, one that seemed to involve socializing and possibly seeking a new romantic relationship. Before long, Scott was seen in the company of a new romantic partner, with the relationship developing at a swift pace. Detectives noted this detail, but despite their growing doubts and the accumulating circumstantial evidence, they knew they needed something concrete to press charges. They worked to compile all the data and continued gathering more facts that could support an indictment. In 2018, after months of waiting, experts provided the results of a comprehensive forensic analysis. The report pointed to strangulation as the cause of death, noting post-mortem marks around Susan's neck that were consistent with asphyxiation. Additionally, DNA analysis of the blood found in Mary Catherine's bedroom revealed a mix of Susan's and Scott's blood, suggesting that a violent altercation had occurred between them. The evidence indicated that Scott had likely attacked his wife during an argument, ultimately resulting in her death. The investigators now had enough evidence to hypothesize that on the night of Susan's death, an argument had erupted between the couple, possibly over work-related frustrations or underlying marital issues. The presence of their mixed blood in the room suggested a struggle, and the marks on Susan's neck indicated that Scott may have ultimately overpowered her, leading to her death by strangulation. This hypothesis, though well supported by forensic evidence, left many wondering about Scott's motivations. Some speculated that he had been unhappy in his marriage for some time, with career ambitions and a desire for a different lifestyle driving a wedge between them. As the case continued, the gathered evidence, though compelling, raised challenging questions for the prosecution. Was Scott's cold demeanor and sudden lifestyle change an indicator of guilt, or simply his way of moving forward from an unhappy marriage? On August 8, 2018, nearly 2 years after the tragic and mysterious death of Susan Sills, detectives once again visited the Sills residence. They bluntly asked if he had murdered his wife. The question appeared to shake Scott. His demeanor immediately shifted as he broke out in a nervous sweat and took a defensive stance. Scott remained adamant that his wife's death was a tragic accident. With this visit, the detectives showed Scott that he was still a suspect. The detectives decided to pore over the contents of Susan's phone, hoping to find evidence or a motive. This line of inquiry soon proved fruitful. Among Susan's saved messages and social media exchanges, detectives found entries that hinted at long-standing marital discord. Susan had confided in friends, expressing deep unhappiness with Scott. Roughly 3 months before her death, she'd written to a close friend, revealing that she felt trapped in her marriage and longed to leave. From that point on, Susan's texts depicted an increasingly strained relationship. A month prior to her death, she confided to another friend that her relationship with Scott had deteriorated to an almost unbearable degree. She was preparing to leave him, but Scott allegedly resisted her plans, fearing that a divorce would disrupt their shared business and personal finances. One specific incident seemed to act as a catalyst for the ongoing conflict. According to Susan's messages, an innocent photograph she'd posted online after losing a friendly bet had angered Scott. While she saw the photo as harmless, Scott viewed it as scandalous and deeply disrespectful. For reasons only he could fully understand, the photo seemed to enrage him, and the tension between them escalated further. This situation led detectives to examine Scott's own phone. There, they found a screenshot of the contentious photo saved on August 30, 2016, a clear indication that Scott had fixated on it. Investigators speculated that jealousy or possessiveness over Susan's image might have played a role in what drove Scott to desperation. Compounding their suspicions, detectives uncovered another startling discovery. The day after Susan's death, Scott had attempted to claim a $250,000 life insurance payout on her policy. Due to the suspicious circumstances of her death, however, his request was denied. This financial angle further fueled investigators' belief that Scott might have had more than one motive for wanting Susan out of the picture. Finally, after over 2 years of gathering evidence, on April 25, 2019, Dr. Scott Sills was formally arrested on charges of murder. Detectives took him into custody as he was on his way to perform surgery, though he was soon released on a $1 million bail. As news of Scott's arrest broke, the case caught widespread attention. The once esteemed doctor, who had built a respectable career and reputation, now stood accused of a heinous crime. Shortly after Scott's legal troubles became public, a woman contacted the police, claiming she'd had an affair with Scott while Susan was still alive. According to her, they'd met on social media, where Scott initially presented himself as a kind and attentive man. But as their relationship developed, Scott allegedly felt pressure to end the affair due to his marital situation. After Susan's death, however, Scott reached out to her, suggesting they could now resume their relationship. In one message dated just 2 weeks after Susan's passing, Scott said he was free and eager to start fresh, a message that contradicted any appearance of grief. Detectives theorized that Scott had been contemplating his freedom for some time, and that Susan had become an obstacle to his aspirations. This led investigators to consider several possible motives for Susan's murder. Financial gain was a prominent theory, as Scott may have been motivated by the $250,000 insurance payout. Divorce, in his mind, could have jeopardized their joint assets, leading him to view murder as a solution that would avoid both a financial split and Susan's ongoing interference in his life. Throughout this period, Scott maintained his innocence and enlisted a skilled lawyer. His defense team argued that Scott's efforts to date again were merely a way for a grieving father to rebuild his family. They pointed to his apparent dedication to his children as evidence that he was trying to provide them with stability. After years of delay, the trial finally began in November 2023. Now aged and visibly affected by the years of legal battles and media scrutiny, Scott appeared a shadow of the confident professional he had once been. Cameras were allowed in the courtroom, despite Scott's resistance to publicity, and the trial quickly became a public spectacle. During the years leading up to his trial, Scott had lost his medical license, experienced financial setbacks, and suffered from depression, as he reported in several hearings. Yet public opinion was largely unsympathetic, with many speculating that his mental state stemmed from the pressure of his alleged guilt. Meanwhile, the defense countered, arguing that the circumstantial evidence could not conclusively prove murder. They cast doubt on the prosecution's interpretation of the bloodstains, argued that the insurance claim was a routine process, and insisted that Scott's attempts to date again reflected a man attempting to cope rather than a killer devoid of remorse. The prosecution launched into a vivid narrative, alleging that on the early morning of November 13, 2016, just after 4 a.m., an argument erupted between Scott Sills and his wife Susan, disturbing the quiet in their home. Their son Eric heard raised voices, only for the sound to be abruptly replaced by silence. The prosecutor argued that in a violent burst of anger, Scott attacked Susan in their daughter Mary Catherine's room, delivering numerous blows before finally strangling her. Once he realized what he had done, Scott attempted to stage the scene as an accident. According to the prosecution, he left Susan's lifeless body by the stairs, arranging her appearance as though she had tumbled down, then simply went to bed. In the morning, he feigned ignorance, acting surprised and unaware of what had happened to his wife. Scott's defense attorney, however, presented a starkly different version of events, passionately arguing Scott's innocence. The lawyer contended Susan's physical condition was compromised. She had been taking a mix of prescribed medications for migraines and other ailments, leaving her feeling weak and unsteady. The defense argued that Susan tragically lost her balance on the stairs, falling and sustaining a fatal injury. The two family dogs, drawn to the commotion, allegedly mistook her movements for play. The lawyer argued that, as Susan lay on the floor with her scarf still around her neck, the dogs innocently tugged at the loose ends of the scarf, accidentally causing it to tighten around her neck and fatally strangling her. In an unexpected turn, Scott and Susan's daughter, Mary Catherine, then 19 years old, spoke in support of her father's version of events. She remained close to her father, despite the dark shadow of suspicion surrounding him, and testified that on the morning of her mother's death, she had indeed seen the dogs pulling on the scarf around her mother's neck. She admitted that, as a young child at the time, she didn't fully comprehend the seriousness of the scene or realize its importance. She explained that investigators hadn't asked her specific questions about that morning, and as a result, she hadn't offered the information sooner. She also clarified a point that had puzzled authorities. She and her father had removed the scarf while attempting to administer first aid, which was why it was later found away from Susan's body. To strengthen their argument, the defense ordered a DNA analysis of the scarf, hoping to detect traces of the dog's saliva or fur. The test results came back positive, lending weight to the defense's theory. The defense further cited the toxicology report, which indicated a combination of sedatives and painkillers in Susan's bloodstream. These medications, they argued, could have impaired her motor skills, making her more prone to a fall. In the days leading up to the tragedy, Susan had reportedly eaten little and appeared fatigued, a condition that could easily have compromised her stability. The lawyer argued that these factors combined to create a tragic set of circumstances, and that even if the dogs had not tugged on her scarf, Susan's injuries from the fall could have resulted in a fatal outcome due to the severity of her injuries and her body's weakened state. But the prosecution did not relent. They pointed out what they considered glaring flaws in the defense's story. For one, they argued, it was implausible that Susan could have fallen so silently that no one would have been alerted. They suggested that the pot she intended to bring down to the kitchen would have clanged loudly on the stairs, raising alarm. The prosecution dismissed the notion that the dogs were involved, arguing that the idea of them somehow strangling her was a desperate attempt to shift focus from the true perpetrator. They insisted that the scarf was not an innocent part of the morning routine, but rather the weapon Scott used in an act of cold-blooded murder. Despite the defense's claim of an accidental fall, forensic experts found no trace of Susan's DNA on the staircase. Not a single drop of blood, hair strand, or fabric fiber that might indicate a fall. With 13 steps to descend, the prosecution argued, it was nearly impossible that no biological evidence would remain if she had truly tumbled. The prosecutor suggested that Scott had staged the scene, deliberately placing Susan's body at the foot of the stairs to give the impression of an accident. In particular, the prosecution emphasized the odd placement of Susan's body. Her leg was still draped over a step when first responders arrived, despite Scott having supposedly performed CPR at the dispatcher's instruction. If he had moved her to a flat surface, as instructed, her body would not have been left in that position. The prosecutor contended that Scott had intentionally kept her there to reinforce his staged narrative, placing Susan as though she had simply slipped and met a tragic end. As the prosecution pressed their case, they highlighted Scott's behavior in the days following Susan's death, which they described as chillingly detached. Nonetheless, the prosecution pressed on, reiterating that a lack of DNA evidence on the stairs, the suspicious positioning of Susan's body, and the implausibility of the dog theory pointed directly to Scott's guilt. They concluded with a powerful argument, contending that Scott's actions on the morning of November 13 were not the result of a tragic accident, but a meticulously calculated decision to end his wife's life. Throughout the 3-week-long trial, Scott chose not to take the stand and testify in his own defense. His decision not to speak, coupled with the high-profile nature of the case, only fueled speculation and further polarized the courtroom. Some saw his silence as a sign of guilt, while others believed that it was simply a strategic move by the defense to avoid potential pitfalls under cross-examination. Scott's decision to remain silent also kept the jury and the public guessing about his motivations, making it even harder for them to reach a definitive understanding of his character. Once both the prosecution and defense had delivered their closing arguments, the fate of Scott Sills was left in the hands of the jury. They deliberated for 3 long hours, carefully considering the various pieces of evidence, witness testimonies, and the opposing narratives that had been presented during the trial. Finally, the jury came to a conclusion that left many stunned. While they were not convinced that Scott had premeditated the murder, they found him guilty of second-degree murder rather than first-degree premeditated murder. The jury's decision was a pivotal moment in the case, marking the end of a long and arduous legal battle. Scott was sentenced to life in prison with the